What if I told you that the loudest boy in Konoha, the one everyone dismissed as a failure, a prankster, a nobody with no clan and no name worth remembering, was about to become the king of an army that could blot out the moon with its shadow? Stick around, because this is the story of how Naruto Uzumaki stopped being just a genin, and started becoming something the shinobi world had never seen before. The morning sun hadn't even cleared the Hokage monument when Naruto Uzumaki was already awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of his apartment, listening to his own stomach growl like it was trying to summon something. 3 bowls of ramen the night before. Somehow still not enough. He sat up, orange jacket half on, half hanging off one shoulder, and glanced at the calendar tacked crookedly to his wall. Another mission day. Another D rank, probably. Another round of chasing a runaway cat with claws sharper than a kunai, or pulling weeds until his hands blistered, while Sasuke got to look cool standing in the background doing absolutely nothing. Today's the day things change, Naruto muttered to no one, the way he always did, like saying it out loud might actually make it true. He had no idea how right he was. By the time he reached the bridge where Team 7 always met, Sakura was already there, arms crossed, tapping her foot with the kind of impatience that meant she'd been waiting exactly 4 minutes and was already furious about it. Sasuke leaned against the railing, saying nothing, looking at nothing, radiating the specific brand of silence that somehow always made Naruto feel like the only loud person in the world. "You're late," Sakura said. "Kakashi-sensei isn't even here yet." Naruto shot back. "That's different. He's always late. You're supposed to be early to make up for it." Naruto opened his mouth to argue the logic of that, found there wasn't any good comeback, and settled for grumbling under his breath instead. 2 hours later, because of course it was 2 hours later, Kakashi finally strolled up with his usual excuse about a black cat and a longer path, and something about helping an old lady cross a bridge that definitely didn't exist. Nobody believed him. Nobody ever did. But there was something different about him that day, a rare flicker of focus in his visible eye as he pulled a scroll from his vest. "We've got a real mission today," he said. "Not D rank." That got everyone's attention. Even Sasuke's eyebrow lifted a fraction of an inch, which for Sasuke was basically jumping up and down and cheering. "An escort mission," Kakashi continued. "A merchant caravan needs to cross the Kaminari Pass through the northern mountains before the seasonal rains close the route. Simple protection detail. Low risk. C rank." "C rank?" Naruto's fist shot into the air. "Finally! A real mission. I'm gonna prove I'm not just some." "It's still an escort mission, Naruto," Sakura sighed. "Not exactly Hokage material." "Every mission's a chance to prove yourself," Kakashi said, and there was something in his tone, light, but not quite as light as usual, that made Naruto pause for half a second before the excitement swallowed it whole. "Every mission's a chance," Naruto would remember him saying, later, when everything about that phrase would take on a meaning none of them could have predicted. The Kaminari Pass cut through a mountain range so old the locals didn't even have consistent stories about how it got its name. Some said lightning struck the peak so often that the rocks themselves had turned black with old burned scars. Others said the name came from something else entirely. Something older, something that howled in the storms and vanished before morning. Naruto didn't care about any of that. He cared about the caravan's food supplies, which included dried beef strips he kept sneaking when the merchant wasn't looking, and about proving to Sasuke, for the 100th time, that he wasn't some tag-along burden on the team. The merchant, a nervous man named Todoroki with a caravan of 3 wagons and 6 hired hands, kept glancing up at the darkening peaks like he expected the mountains themselves to reach down and grab him. "You're sure this is safe?" he asked Kakashi for the 4th time that day. "Bandits haven't hit this pass in years," Kakashi said. "The real danger's the weather. We push through before the storm season locks the roads." "It's not bandits I'm worried about," Todoroki muttered, low enough that only Naruto, walking close by, chewing on stolen beef jerky, caught it. "Huh! What else is there to worry about?" Todoroki's eyes flicked to him, then away, like he regretted saying anything at all. "Nothing. Old stories. Foolish talk." "What kind of stories?" "The kind you don't repeat on the road," the merchant said, and picked up his pace, leaving Naruto more curious than satisfied. "Old stories. Foolish talk." Naruto would think about those words a lot later, wishing he'd pushed harder for an answer while there was still time to get one that made sense. They were 2 days into the pass when the sky turned the color of an old bruise. Kakashi called for the caravan to push forward faster, hoping to clear the narrowest section of the trail, a stretch where the path hugged a cliff wall on one side and dropped into a churning river gorge on the other, before the storm hit. Sakura kept close to the wagons. Sasuke scouted ahead, silent as ever. Naruto brought up the rear, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds at clouds that seemed to be moving wrong somehow, swirling in patterns that didn't match any wind he could feel. The first crack of thunder came without warning, and it wasn't like any thunder Naruto had heard before. It didn't roll. It didn't echo and fade the way thunder was supposed to. It sounded almost like a howl. "Did you guys hear that?" Naruto called out. "It's a storm, Naruto. Thunder is loud. That's what it does," Sakura shouted back over the rising wind. But Kakashi had gone still, his eye narrowed toward the peaks above them, and for a shinobi who rarely looked rattled by anything, that stillness said more than words could. The second crack came seconds later, and this time the ground moved with it. "Rock slide." Kakashi's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Get the wagons back, now!" It happened too fast for anyone to process properly. A section of the cliff face above them sheared away in a roar of stone and dust, and where there had been a trail wide enough for wagons, there was suddenly a wall of falling rock crashing down between Naruto and the rest of his team. He heard Sakura scream his name. He heard Kakashi shout something about the caravan, about finding another way around, about "hold on, we're coming." And then there was only noise, and gray dust, and the ground giving way beneath his feet like the mountain itself had decided it didn't want him standing on it anymore. Naruto fell. He wasn't sure how long the fall lasted. Long enough that his stomach did that horrible weightless flip more than once. Long enough that he had time to think, with startling clarity, so this is how it ends. That's kind of a lame way to go. I didn't even get to be Hokage yet, before he slammed into something that was not the bottom of a ravine, not solid rock, but a slope of loose scree that sent him tumbling and rolling down into darkness. When he finally stopped moving, coughing dust out of his lungs, blinking against the throbbing pain in his skull, the first thing he registered was silence. Not the silence of the storm above, that was still raging somewhere far overhead, a distant rumble he could barely hear now. This was a different kind of quiet. Heavy. Old. The kind of quiet that made the small sounds of his own breathing seem too loud. "Sakura? Sasuke? Kakashi-sensei?" His voice cracked out into the dark and came back to him distorted, bouncing off walls he couldn't see. "Anybody?" Nothing answered. Naruto pushed himself upright, wincing at the bruises already blooming along his ribs, and fumbled in his pouch for anything useful. No flashlight. Shinobi didn't usually carry those, but he did have a small scroll of exploding tags, which, after a moment's thought, he decided not to use unless things got desperate. Setting off an explosion in an unknown underground space seemed like exactly the kind of decision that got a person's name added to the memorial stone early. Instead he focused chakra into his palm, letting it glow faintly, not much, but enough to see by, a soft blue-white light that pushed back the darkness in a small circle around him. What that light revealed made him forget, for a moment, that he was supposed to be scared. He was standing in a cavern. Not a natural one, or not only natural. The walls, as far as his makeshift light could reach, were carved. Not roughly, not like something hacked out by desperate hands trying to survive a cave-in, but deliberately, beautifully, in patterns that curled and looped across the stone like something between calligraphy and claw marks. And every single one of them was shaped like a wolf. "Okay," Naruto said slowly, to the empty dark, "that's new. Now most people, finding themselves alone in an ancient cave covered in carvings of giant wolves, might consider turning around. Naruto Uzumaki is not most people. If you've been with this story from the start, you already know what's coming. But if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because the next few minutes are about to change everything you thought you knew about this failure of a genin." Naruto pressed forward, one hand trailing along the carved wall, chakra light flickering in his palm. The carvings grew denser the deeper he went, wolves in poses he never imagined an artist choosing, not hunting, not snarling. Standing in formation, row after row, facing something at the center of what looked like a massive engraved circle. Some of the wolves in the carvings were the size of houses next to the tiny human figures kneeling before them. Others wore what looked like armor, etched in careful, precise lines, plates along the shoulders, banded protection down the legs, symbols on their chests that Naruto didn't recognize but somehow felt like he should. The passage opened into a wider chamber, and here the carvings gave way to something else entirely. A floor inlaid with silver that caught what little light there was and threw it back tenfold, illuminating the whole cavern in a soft, moonlight glow despite there being no visible source of actual light anywhere. At the center of the room, raised on a low stone dais, sat a massive seal. It looked nothing like the sealing formulas Naruto had seen on scrolls back home, nothing like the one on his own stomach that he still didn't fully understand. This one was circular, layered with concentric rings of characters in a script that predated anything in the Konoha archives, and at its exact center sat a single stone, smooth, dark, roughly the size of a fist, pulsing faintly with a light that seemed to breathe in and out like something alive. Naruto's feet carried him forward before his brain caught up with the decision to move. "What is this place?" he whispered. As if in answer, the pulsing light in the stone brightened. Every muscle in Naruto's body screamed at him to stop, to back away, to remember every lesson Kakashi and Iruka had ever taught him about not touching unknown sealed objects in strange underground ruins you fell into by accident. He knew, on some level, that this was exactly the kind of situation that got shinobi killed in horror stories told around campfires. He reached out and touched it anyway. The moment his fingers made contact, the world did not explode, did not collapse, did not do any of the dramatic things his imagination had half braced for. Instead, warmth spread up through his hand, into his arm, into his chest, and with it came a sound. Faint at first, like something heard from very far away, growing louder with each heartbeat. A howl, not one voice, but hundreds. Thousands. A chorus of howls rising up from somewhere beneath his feet, beneath the very stone of the mountain, as though an entire hidden world had suddenly noticed him and was calling out in recognition. The seal beneath his palm flared white gold, and lines of light shot outward across the chamber floor, racing along channels Naruto hadn't even noticed were carved into the silver, illuminating the entire massive circle in a burst of brilliant light. And that was when the wall behind the dais split open, not collapsed, not crumbled. Opened deliberately, like a door that had simply been waiting the right amount of pressure to swing free, revealing a passage beyond it that breathed cold, moonlit air into the chamber, air that had no business being underground at all, air that smelled like pine and frost, and something else Naruto couldn't name but that made every hair on his arms stand straight up. And out of that passage came something the size of a small building. Naruto had fought, or at least witnessed, some large creatures in his short life. Giant toads. The occasional oversized summon on the training grounds. He thought he had a decent mental category for impressively big animal. None of that prepared him for the wolf that stepped into the chamber. It stood easily 3 times his height at the shoulder, for the color of moonlight on fresh snow. Silver white and faintly luminous in a way that seemed less like reflection and more like the fur itself was generating its own soft glow. Its eyes were the deep, molten gold of a sunset, and when they fixed on Naruto, he felt something in his chest go very still, the way prey must feel in the half-second before it realizes it's been spotted. Scarred along one flank in a pattern too deliberate to be an accident of battle, wearing what looked like ancient, weathered armor plates fused seamlessly into its fur at the shoulders and along its spine, the wolf lowered its massive head until its golden eyes were level with Naruto's own. Naruto did not run. He wanted to, every instinct screaming at him to bolt back the way he'd come. But something about the way the creature looked at him, not with hunger, not with the mindless aggression of a beast, but with something closer to recognition, closer to appraisal, rooted him to the spot. "You," the wolf said. Its voice was deep enough to vibrate in Naruto's bones, ancient in a way that made the word feel like it had been carried across centuries just to reach him. "You are the one," the seal called. "You can talk?" Was, embarrassingly, the first thing out of Naruto's mouth. The wolf's lips pulled back, not quite a snarl, closer to something that might, on a creature capable of human expressions, have been amusement. "You touch a seal that has waited 1,000 years for the right hand. And your first question is whether I can talk." "Well, yeah. That seems like a pretty important detail. Braver than most, the wolf rumbled, or considerably more foolish. Perhaps both. Naruto straightened, some of his usual bravado creeping back, and now that the initial shock had worn thin enough for pride to reassert itself. Hey, I'm not foolish. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, future Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village, and I'm not scared of some giant wolf, talking or not. Something in the great wolf's golden gaze sharpened at the name. A flicker of interest, quickly masked. Uzumaki, it repeated slowly, as though tasting the word. That name carries old weight. Older than you likely know. What's that supposed to mean? The wolf did not answer directly. Instead, it drew itself up to its full, imposing height, and when it spoke again, its voice carried through the chamber and, Naruto could have sworn, through the stone of the mountain itself, echoing outward into distances he couldn't begin to guess at. I am Tsukikage, elder sentinel of the Moon Fawn Dominion, keeper of the seal of first ascension since before your village's walls were first raised. For 1,000 years I have guarded this chamber, waiting for chakra that resonates with the bloodline of the first alpha to return to these halls. The first alpha? The one who founded our civilization, Tsukikage said. The one whose line was thought extinguished generations ago. And yet, the great wolf's nostrils flared, drawing in a slow breath as though scenting something in the air around Naruto that no human sense could detect. Here you stand. Human in shape. Uzumaki in name, and carrying, buried deep beneath a second, far louder chakra, the unmistakable echo of the bloodline this seal was built to recognize. Naruto blinked. Processed. Blinked again. I think you've got the wrong guy, he said finally. I'm just a genin. I'm not. I don't have some secret royal wolf bloodline, believe it. I'm an orphan, I don't even know who my parents were, I've got no clan, no. The seal does not lie, Tsukikage cut in, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. And it has already made its choice. As if summoned by the declaration itself, the ground began to tremble. At first Naruto thought it was another rock slide, some aftershock of the collapse that had sent him tumbling down here in the first place. But the tremor had a rhythm to it, a pattern too deliberate, too organized to be anything geological. It was the sound of thousands of paws striking stone in unison, growing louder, closer, converging from passages Naruto hadn't even known existed, all throughout the mountain. Through the open passage behind Tsukikage, more shapes began to emerge, wolves of every size, silver-white fur catching that same impossible moonlight, some no larger than the dogs Kiba kept back in Konoha, others rivaling Tsukikage's own massive frame. They poured into the chamber in staggering numbers, filling every available space, until Naruto found himself standing at the center of a sea of golden eyes, all fixed on him with the same weight of ancient, expectant attention. Naruto said, doing his best not to let his voice shake, that's a lot of wolves. You stand, Tsukikage said, voice ringing out over the assembled multitude, before the gathered voice of the Moon Fawn Dominion. Thousands of moon wolves whose loyalty has waited a millennium for a king worthy of the first Alpha's line, whose howl has not sounded in unified call since our last true ruler fell in an age your history books do not even remember. The wolves around them began, softly at first, to howl, a low, rising harmony that built and built until it filled the entire chamber, until Naruto could feel it in his teeth, in the marrow of his bones. A sound so vast and so ancient that it felt less like noise and more like the mountain itself was speaking. But a seal's recognition is not the same as a crown earned, Tsukikage continued, once the howling chorus had settled back into an expectant hush. The Dominion does not follow blood alone, it follows strength. It follows wisdom. It follows a heart proven worthy through trial, not merely inherited through lineage. Naruto's fist tightened at his sides, some deep and stubborn part of him. The same part that had spent his whole life refusing to accept you're not good enough from anyone, teacher or villager or rival, rising to meet the challenge in the great wolf's words before he'd even fully processed what was being asked of him. So what, he said, you're saying I gotta prove myself? Fine. I've been proving myself my whole life, believe it. Nobody in Konoha thought I'd amount to anything either, and look at me now, genin of Team 7, on a real mission, about to become Hokage someday whether anyone likes it or not. A ripple of sound moved through the assembled wolves, something that, on human faces, might have passed for surprised, reluctant approval. Tsukukuge's golden eyes studied him for a long, weighing moment. The 3 trials of the moon have not been undertaken by an outsider in living memory, the great wolf said at last. Should you fail, you will be cast from these halls, the seal resealed, and this entire encounter erased from your memory by means older than your shinobi arts. Should you succeed, the wolf paused, and for just a moment, something almost gentle crept into that ancient, weighted voice. Then you will become something this world has not seen since before the Sage of 6 Paths walked it. Alpha King of the Mufon Dominion. Commander of every moon wolf in these mountains. Master of the elite Alpha Guard. Student of the ancient beast sages, who have not taken a pupil in generations. Naruto's breath caught. An army, he said slowly, the scale of it only now beginning to sink in. You're saying I could command an army. I am saying, Tsukukuge corrected, that you could become responsible for one. There is a considerable difference, young Uzumaki, and it is a difference the trials themselves will teach you, should you prove capable of surviving them. Outside, far above the mountain, Naruto's actual mission, his team, his sensei, the merchant caravan he'd been sent to protect, were still searching the rubble of the rockslide, calling his name into a canyon that gave back only echoes. He had no way of knowing that. No way of knowing how much time was passing up there while an entirely different destiny unfolded beneath their feet. All he knew was the weight of 1,000 golden eyes upon him, the echo of a howl still humming in his bones, and a choice that no one back in Konoha would have believed him capable of making. All right, Naruto said, and despite everything, despite the impossible scale of what he was agreeing to, despite not having the faintest idea what 3 trials of the moon actually involved, a familiar, stubborn grin spread across his face. Bring on your trials. I don't back down from a challenge. Ever. Tsukukuge's golden eyes gleamed with something that might, on a creature capable of it, have been the first faint edge of approval. Then let it begin, the elder sentinel said, with the trial of Fang. And as one, every wolf in that vast chamber threw back its head and howled, a sound so immense, so ancient, that it rolled up through solid stone, out past the ruined mountain pass where a storm still raged, out across the entire Kaminari range, carrying a single message to anyone with the ears to understand it, shinobi and beast alike. The Dominion has found its king. The howl that had rolled through the mountain chamber was still fading into distant echoes when Tsukukuge turned, silver-white for rippling like moonlit water, and fixed those molten gold eyes on Naruto once more. Before you face the first trial, the elder sentinel said, you will see what it is you're fighting to lead. It is one thing to accept a challenge blindly, boy. It is another to understand its weight. I already said I'm in, Naruto said, crossing his arms with the stubborn confidence of someone who had absolutely no idea what he was actually agreeing to. You don't gotta convince me twice. I am not convincing you. Tsukukuge's tone carried the faintest edge of dry amusement, the kind an old teacher might use on an eager but clueless student. I am ensuring that when you fail to understand the scope of what you've stumbled into, you cannot claim I withheld it from you. That struck Naruto's confidence down a peg or two. Wait, fail? You think I'm gonna fail? I think, Tsukukuge said, already turning to lead him toward the passage the other wolves had emerged from, that no outsider has walked these halls in longer than your village has existed, and every single one of them believed exactly what you believe right now. Come. Look. Then decide if your certainty survives the sight. The passage sloped gently upward, widening as it went, the carved stone walls giving way gradually to something that felt less like a tunnel and more like the throat of the mountain itself opening up to breathe. Naruto followed close behind the massive wolf, flanked on either side now by a loose procession of smaller moon wolves who watched him with open, unguarded curiosity, pups no bigger than Akamaru trotting between the legs of wolves the size of small horses, all of them craning their necks for a glimpse of the strange two-legged creature the seal had chosen. They're all just staring at me, Naruto muttered. You are the first human most of them have ever seen, Tsukukuge said. And the first potential alpha born outside the Dominion's own bloodlines in 1,000 years. Forgive them their curiosity. I mean, I get it, I guess. I'd stare too. The passage opened, finally, into open air, and Naruto stopped dead in his tracks, every smart remark dying on his tongue at once. They stood at the mouth of a valley he had absolutely no business finding underneath a mountain range in the Land of Fire's northern reaches. It stretched out before him in a vast basin ringed by impossibly tall cliffs, the sky above bathed in a permanent, soft twilight despite it being the middle of the day outside, a sky lit not by sun but by a moon that hung fat and silver directly overhead, far larger and closer than any moon Naruto had ever seen, casting the entire valley in gentle, glowing light. Below him spread a civilization unlike anything in any scroll he'd ever read, any story any academy instructor had ever told. Structures built into the cliff faces and rising from the valley floor in curved, organic shapes that seemed grown as much as built, pale stone worked into archways and towers that mimicked the shape of bared fangs and raised hackles. Moon wolves moved through the streets below in numbers that made Naruto's earlier estimate of a lot of wolves feel laughably small, thousands upon thousands, going about lives that looked, in their own strange way, remarkably ordinary. Wolves tending to gardens of pale, glowing plants. Wolves carrying baskets in their jaws between buildings. Smaller wolves, pups, Naruto realized, chasing each other between the legs of elders in games that looked suspiciously like tag. And moving among them, here and there, were wolves that walked upright. Wait, Naruto said, pointing. Some of them, the elite Alpha Guard and certain elder ranks may take a more bipedal stance when it suits them, Tsukikage said. It is a mark of status and mastery, not a difference in kind. All are moon wolf, all are of the Dominion. Naruto's eyes tracked one such figure, tall, imposing, moving through the crowded street below with an armored cloak draped over powerful shoulders, other wolves parting instinctively to let it pass. Even from this distance, Naruto could feel the presence radiating off the figure, a weight in the air that reminded him uncomfortably of the way Kakashi-sensei felt when he stopped joking around and got serious. Who's that? Fenric, Tsukikage said. One of 4 elite Alpha Guards who serve directly beneath the throne. You will meet them properly, should you survive to earn that privilege. Should I survive? Okay, you gotta stop saying it like that, you're kinda ruining the mood here. Tsukikage huffed, a sound that might, on a human, have been something close to a laugh. Walk with me, boy. There is more you need to see before the elders convene. They descended a wide, switchbacking path carved into the cliffside, and the closer they got to the valley floor, the more Naruto found himself staring at the architecture, at the strange glowing gardens tended by wolves with surprising delicacy given the size of their paws, at a group of pups tumbling over each other in a patch of pale blue grass while an older wolf watched with obvious, weary affection that reminded Naruto sharply of Irika-sensei watching over a class of unruly academy students. It didn't feel like a den of monsters. It felt like a home. A real one, with all the ordinary, unglamorous texture of actual daily life woven through it. This doesn't look anything like I expected, Naruto admitted. What did you expect? I dunno. Scarier, maybe? Like, a bunch of giant wolves just, like, howling and fighting all the time? We are not mindless beasts, Naruto Uzumaki, Tsukikage said, and there was an edge in the words now, old and sharp, the first real flash of something like offense the elder sentinel had shown. We built this valley. We have kept it hidden and thriving for 1,000 years while your shinobi world tore itself apart in wars you have no doubt read about in your academy scrolls. We have philosophy, law, history longer and in places wiser than your own. Do not mistake Fang and Claw for the absence of mind. Sorry, Naruto said, and meant it. I didn't mean it like, I just didn't know. Nobody ever told me any of this existed. Something in Tsukikage's posture eased, fractionally. No. I imagine they did not. Few outside these mountains remember we exist at all, and we have worked very hard to keep it that way. Why hide, though? If you've got all this, Naruto gestured at the valleys sprawling below them, why not, I dunno, be part of the world? Trade, or, the elemental nations could probably use allies like you guys. Tsukikage was quiet for a long moment, golden eyes fixed on the valley below, on centuries Naruto couldn't begin to guess the shape of. That, the elder sentinel said finally, is a question the elders themselves have never fully agreed upon. Some believe as you do, that the Dominion's strength should stand openly in the world, allied where alliance serves us. Others remember why we retreated to these mountains in the first place, and believe that memory should never be allowed to fade. A pause. You will hear both arguments soon enough. Come, it is time you met them. The Great Den Hall, as Tsukikage called it, sat at the very center of the valley, a massive circular structure with an open roof that let the strange silver moonlight pour directly down onto a floor inlaid with the same glowing patterns Naruto had seen in the ceiling chamber. Around its edges, on raised stone platforms, sat what could only be described as a council, a dozen or more moon wolves of clearly advanced age, fur gone from silver white to a duller gray, some bearing scars that told stories Naruto could only guess at. Word had apparently traveled ahead of them, because by the time Naruto stepped through the towering archway into the hall, every single elder was already watching him. The silence that followed was, without question, the least comfortable Naruto had felt since the time he accidentally walked in on the third Hokage in the middle of a bath. So, rumbled one of the elders, a massive, scarred wolf with a torn ear and eyes so pale gold they were nearly white. This is what the seal called a human child, said another, smaller and sharper featured, her voice carrying an edge Naruto didn't care for one bit. Barely more than a pup himself. This is what we're meant to believe carries the first alpha's blood. The seal does not err, Yuki, Tsukikage said, and his voice, though calm, carried enough weight that the sharp-featured elder's ears flattened slightly in something like reluctant deference. You know this as well as I. I know the seal recognizes a pattern in the chakra it is shown, Yuki shot back. I do not know that a pattern is the same as worthiness. Ancestry is not character, Tsukikage. We have made that mistake before, and paid for it. A murmur ran through the assembled elders at that, clearly some old, sore point being scratched at. Naruto, unused to being talked about like he wasn't standing right there, cleared his throat loudly. Hi. Naruto Uzumaki. And for the record, I didn't ask for any of this. I just fell down a hole and touched a rock, so if you guys want to argue about whether I'm worthy or whatever, that's fine. But maybe let me actually try before you decide I'm a lost cause. That got a reaction, a ripple of surprise through the council, and from the scarred elder with the torn ear, something that might have been the beginning of a rough, approving laugh. He has spirit, at least, the torn-eared elder said. I am Varga's boy, eldest of this council, and among the few here old enough to remember the last true Alpha King with my own eyes, not merely through story. Naruto's ears perked up despite himself. You knew the last king? I served him, Vargas said, and something ancient and grieving moved behind those pale eyes. Before he fell, and this valley closed its gates to the wider world, and the throne sat empty for 1,000 years waiting for a seal to sing again. What happened to him? The last king, I mean. The hall went very quiet. That, Vargas said slowly, is a story for another day, should you earn the right to hear it in full. For now, understand only this. The crown you seek to claim has cost more than most kingdoms' worth of lives to protect. It is not a prize to be won for glory, boy. It is a burden, and those who take it up carelessly have, in our history, brought ruin upon this valley more than once. Naruto swallowed, the weight of the words settling somewhere heavier than he expected. I'm not looking for glory, he said, quieter now than his usual bluster. Back home, nobody's ever looked at me and seen anything worth trusting with something this big. Everybody either ignores me or thinks I'm some kind of screw-up waiting to happen. If your seal thinks I'm worth something, I want to prove it's right. Not for the crown. Just to prove it. The hall was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. Yuki's sharp eyes studied him with something less hostile, more assessing. Vargas's scarred face was unreadable, but the old wolf's ears had tilted forward, listening in a way they hadn't before. Pretty words, Yuki said eventually, though the edge in her voice had dulled somewhat. The trials will tell us whether they hold any weight behind them. They will, Tsukikage said, with a certainty that surprised even Naruto. I have watched candidates enter these halls before, Elder. I know the difference between bravado and belief. This one believes. And there's your first real glimpse into the world Naruto's about to fight for, a civilization 1,000 years deep, torn between hope and old scars, watching to see if the boy the seal chose is worth the risk of trusting again. But belief only gets you so far. Up next, the trials themselves. And trust me, the trial of Fang is exactly as brutal as it sounds. The council dismissed with far less ceremony than Naruto expected, a series of rumbled agreements and a few last, lingering, skeptical looks from Yuki, and Tsukikage led him back out into the valley's silver light, this time toward a wide training ground at the settlement's edge where a crowd was already beginning to gather. Word, it seemed, traveled fast in the Mufang Dominion. So, the trial of Fang, Naruto said, jogging to keep pace with the elder sentinel's long strides. What exactly does that involve? Please tell me it doesn't involve, like, biting anybody. It involves a great many things, and yes, biting is generally one of them, Tsukikuchi said, with what Naruto was increasingly convinced was a dry, ancient sense of humor buried under all that gravitas. The first trial tests raw strength and instinct, the willingness to meet challenge without hesitation, without the crutch of borrowed tools or clever tricks. You will face a rotating gauntlet of challengers, chosen from among the pack's finest young warriors, using nothing but what your own body and will can bring to bear. Naruto's stomach dropped a little. Wait, no ninjutsu? No jutsu at all? None. The Dominion does not measure a king's worth by the cleverness of his tools, but by the strength of his own 2 hands, or, in your case, his own 2 fists. A pause. Though I will admit, given what little I have already sensed stirring in your chakra, I suspect no jutsu may prove a more interesting handicap on you than it would on most humans. What's that supposed to mean? You will understand soon enough. They arrived at the training ground to find it already ringed by what looked like half the valley's population, wolves of every size packed shoulder to shoulder around a wide circle of packed earth, murmuring excitedly amongst themselves. At the center of that circle stood a young wolf warrior, upright on 2 legs in the manner of the elite guard, lean and coiled with obvious, aggressive energy. Golden eyes locked on Naruto the moment he stepped into view. So this is him, the warrior said, voice carrying easily across the hushed crowd. The human the seal supposedly chose. Ryuk, Tsukikuchi said, a note of warning in the single word. I mean no disrespect to the seal, elder sentinel. The warrior, Ryuk, apparently, bared his teeth in something that was technically a smile but carried absolutely none of the warmth of one. Only to the notion that a soft, hairless pup barely out of his own academy could possibly carry the strength this crown demands. I volunteer to be his first challenger. It seems only fitting that I show him, and everyone watching, exactly how far short of the first alpha's legacy he falls. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, some approving, some uneasy, all of it making very clear that Ryuk's opinion was shared by more than a few of those watching. Naruto felt the old, familiar heat rise in his chest, not fear, but something closer to the stubborn fire that had carried him through every moment in his life when someone decided, before he'd even opened his mouth, that he wasn't worth taking seriously. You know, Naruto said, rolling his shoulders, cracking his knuckles with the confidence he mostly felt, everybody back home said the exact same kind of stuff about me. And you know what? I'm still standing. So go ahead, bring it on, fuzzball. I've been underestimated by better than you. Ryuk's golden eyes narrowed, ears flattening in obvious irritation at the nickname, and a low growl rolled up from his chest. Careful, human, he said. Confidence and competence are not the same thing. You are about to learn the difference. Tsukikuchi stepped back to the edge of the circle, raising his great head to address the assembled crowd, voice rolling out over the valley like the toll of some enormous bell. Let the trial of Fang begin. The crowd's murmur rose into an eager, expectant roar, thousands of golden eyes fixed on the circle where Naruto Uzumaki, genin of the Hidden Leaf, orphan, self-proclaimed future Hokage, and now candidate for a throne 1,000 years empty, squared off against his first challenger, with absolutely no idea what he was about to discover about the strange, dormant power stirring in his own blood. Ryuk moved first, a blur of silver-white motion, faster than anything Naruto had sparred against in the academy, faster even than most of what he'd seen from Sasuke, closing the distance in a single powerful bound, claws raised in a strike meant to test, not to kill, but with more than enough force behind it to make that distinction feel academic. Naruto barely got his arms up in time to block. The impact sent him skidding backward through the packed earth, boots carving twin furrows as he fought to stay upright, arms singing with pain from a blow that hit far harder than its owner's lean frame had any right to deliver. Okay, Naruto thought, shaking out his stinging arms, a fierce grin spreading across his face despite the pain, despite the crowd's mixed reaction, despite every reasonable instinct telling him this was going to hurt a lot more before it got any better. That's more like it. Not bad, he called out, settling into a rough approximation of a fighting stance. But you're gonna have to do a lot better than that if you want to keep me down. Ryuk's ears twitched, surprise quickly masked behind renewed aggression. As you wish. And he came again, faster this time, and the crowd's roar rose to fill the entire silver-lit valley as the trial of Fang truly began in earnest. Ryuk came in low the second time, faster than before, feinting toward Naruto's ribs before pivoting at the last possible instant into a sweeping strike aimed at his legs. Naruto had just enough time to register the feint as a feint, a half-second flicker of instinct he couldn't fully explain, like some part of him already knew the shape of the attack before it landed, and threw himself into a rough, ungraceful roll that got him clear by inches instead of nothing at all. He came up breathing hard, arms already aching from the first block, and found Ryuk watching him with narrowed golden eyes that had lost some of their earlier contempt and replaced it with something sharper, more attentive. "You saw that coming," Ryuk said. It wasn't quite a compliment. It wasn't quite an accusation either. "Lucky guess," Naruto said, though privately he wasn't sure that was true. Something about the way Ryuk moved, the tension coiling through his shoulders right before he committed to a strike, the way his weight shifted a fraction of a second before his feet did. Naruto could read it, in a way he'd never been able to read Sasuke or Kakashi or anyone else he'd sparred against back home. It wasn't like using the Sharingan. It was quieter than that. More like instinct whispering directions he'd never been taught. He didn't have time to think about it further, because Ryuk was already moving again. This time Naruto didn't just dodge. He ducked under the strike and drove a punch up into Ryuk's exposed ribs, putting every ounce of frustration from years of being underestimated into the blow. Ryuk grunted, actual surprise this time, and skidded back several feet, one clawed hand pressed briefly to his side before he shook it off, expression hardening. The crowd, which had been murmuring in a low, skeptical hum through the trial's opening exchanges, went suddenly, sharply quiet. "He landed a hit," someone in the crowd murmured, disbelief plain in the voice. "On Ryuk." "Beginner's luck," someone else shot back, but with noticeably less conviction than the sentiment probably deserved. Up near the front of the assembled pack, Tsukiki's golden eyes narrowed with something that might have been quiet, careful interest, watching not just the exchange itself but the way Naruto had seen the strike coming before it fully committed. That kind of instinct wasn't something the Dominion's warriors expected to find in an outsider. It was something closer to what they expected to find in one of their own. If you're new here, welcome, and seriously, hit that subscribe button, because this fight is about to get a whole lot more interesting. See, Naruto doesn't know it yet, but that flicker of instinct he just felt? That's not luck. That's blood. And it's about to wake up a lot louder than either he or Ryuk are prepared for. Ryuk shook off the surprise fast, dropping back into a low, coiled stance that put considerably more respect into his posture than his opening bravado had suggested he was capable of. "Fine," he said, voice tight. "You want to test the Dominion's strength? I'll show you what it actually means to fight like a wolf." He came in again, and this time there was no restraint in it at all. Claws extended, movements blurring into a series of strikes so fast Naruto could barely track them, each one aimed with the kind of precision that spoke less of anger and more of a warrior determined to end a fight quickly and decisively before it got any more embarrassing. Naruto got his arms up, blocked the first strike, took the second across his shoulder hard enough to spin him halfway around, and barely managed to twist out from under the third before it could connect with anything vital. Pain bloomed along his arm, his shoulder, a dull, spreading ache that told him plainly this fight was not going to end on his terms if he kept playing purely defensive. Gotta do something, he thought, breathing hard, dodging another strike by a margin that felt uncomfortably close. Can't win just blocking forever. Gotta find an opening. He thought, briefly, wildly, of the shadow clone jutsu, of a dozen other tricks that had gotten him out of tighter spots than this one, and had to physically stop himself from reaching for chakra he wasn't allowed to use. No jutsu. Just him. Just whatever he actually had, stripped down to nothing but fists and instinct and stubborn refusal to lose. It was, if he was being honest with himself, kind of terrifying. Every fight he'd ever won, he'd won with some trick up his sleeve, some clone, some prank, some unexpected angle nobody saw coming. Take that away and what was actually left? Ryuk came in again, and this time Naruto didn't try to predict the strike. He just watched, really watched, the way Kakashi was always telling him to and he never quite managed under normal circumstances. and in the half-second before Ryuk's claws would have raked across his chest, something in Naruto's chest pulled, sharp and sudden, like a string yanked taut. He moved. Not fast the way he normally moved. Fast in a way that felt like his body had briefly stopped waiting for his brain's permission, ducking under the strike, driving forward, and slamming his shoulder into Ryuk's chest with enough force to send the young warrior stumbling backward, off balance for the first time since the trial had begun. The crowd's murmur spiked into something considerably louder. Ryuk caught himself before he fell, breathing hard, staring at Naruto with wide, startled golden eyes. "What," he said slowly, "was that? Honestly?" Naruto said, equally startled, flexing fingers that were tingling with something he couldn't name. "I have no idea." Up near the ring's edge, Vargas, the scarred elder who claimed to have served the last true Alpha King, leaned toward Tsukikage, his pale gold eyes fixed intently on the fight below. "Did you see that?" he murmured, low enough that the words wouldn't carry beyond the two of them. "That burst. That was not human reflex." "I saw it," Tsukikage rumbled back, equally quiet. "That was pack instinct. Moonblood instinct. I have not seen a human body move like that since." Vargas stopped himself, old grief flickering briefly behind his pale eyes before he pushed it down, and continued, more carefully. "It seems the seal knew precisely what it was doing." "I never doubted that it did," Tsukikage said. "The council, however, will need considerably more convincing than a single lucky exchange." "Then let us watch," Vargas said, "and see if it happens again." It happened again. Not every time. Naruto took plenty of hits over the following exchanges, each one leaving fresh bruises and a growing, stubborn ache in muscles he didn't usually push this hard. But every few strikes, that strange pulling sensation would spike in his chest again, and his body would move faster and sharper than it had any business moving, dodging or countering in ways that felt less like conscious choice and more like some deeply buried part of him waking up piece by piece and taking the wheel for half a second at a time. It was disorienting. It was also, he had to admit somewhere beneath the adrenaline and the pain, kind of incredible. Ryuk, for his part, had stopped holding anything back the moment it became clear this fight wasn't going to be the quick, humiliating lesson he'd promised the crowd. Every strike came faster now, harder, more precise, and Naruto found himself giving ground more often than not, blocking 2 strikes for every one he managed to land, breath coming ragged, sweat mixing with the dust kicked up across the packed earth of the ring. This guy's actually really strong, Naruto thought, ducking under a claw strike that would have taken his head clean off if it connected. Like Sasuke level strong. Maybe more. He thought of Sasuke then, and Sakura, and Kakashi-sensei, still somewhere up above searching a mountain pass for a genin who'd vanished into a rock slide. The thought sent an unexpected pang through his chest, sharper than any of the physical blows he'd taken so far. They're probably worried sick. I gotta get through this and figure out how to get back to them. The distraction cost him. Ryuk's next strike caught him across the ribs, hard enough to knock the wind clean out of him and send him sprawling backward into the dirt. The crowd's roar rising into something that sounded uncomfortably close to a countdown. Naruto lay there for a second, staring up at that impossible, too close silver moon, ribs screaming, lungs fighting to remember how breathing worked. "Get up," something in him said. Not a voice, exactly. More like an instinct so old, and so deep it barely felt like it belonged to him at all. But it was there, insistent, familiar in a way that made his chest ache with something he didn't have a name for. "Get up. You are not finished. You have never been finished. Get up. Had enough?" Ryuk called out, though something in his voice suggested he didn't fully believe his own question. Naruto rolled onto his side, pushed himself up onto one knee, spat blood into the dirt, and grinned, the same stubborn, infuriating grin that had gotten him through every humiliation Konoha had ever handed him, sharpened now by something new underneath it. "Not even close," he said, and pushed himself fully upright, fists raised again. The crowd's noise shifted, the skeptical murmur of the trial's opening minutes giving way to something else entirely. Not full belief, not yet. But interest. Genuine, unguarded interest, thousands of golden eyes locked on the strange, bruised, bleeding human boy who kept getting back up no matter how many times he was knocked down. And this, right here, is exactly why you should never count Naruto Uzumaki out, because whatever else changes about him over the course of this story, that stubborn refusal to stay down, that's the one thing that never does. But Ryuk's not done either. And what happens next is going to change the shape of this fight completely. Ryuk's next assault came faster and more relentless than anything before it. A flurry of strikes clearly designed to end the fight before Naruto's stubbornness could cost him any more dignity in front of the assembled crowd. Naruto blocked what he could, took what he couldn't, and felt that strange pulling sensation in his chest building steadily now, no longer coming in isolated flickers but rising into something closer to a constant, low thrum beneath his skin. Like a drum he could almost hear, growing louder with every heartbeat. Something's happening, he thought, dimly aware even through the chaos of the fight that whatever this feeling was, it was building towards something. Ryuk lunged in for what looked like a finishing strike, claws raised, all the earlier restraint completely gone from his movements now, and in the half-second before impact, that thrumming pressure in Naruto's chest finally broke. It didn't feel like the fox's chakra, the wild, burning, malicious pressure Naruto had felt once or twice before in moments of real danger. The presence he still didn't fully understand sealed away somewhere deep inside him. This was different. Cooler. Older. It felt less like heat and more like moonlight given weight, spreading out from his chest through his arms, his legs, sharpening his vision until he could track every fiber of tension in Ryuk's coiled muscles, every shift of weight, every infinitesimal detail of the incoming strike. Naruto moved. He caught Ryuk's wrist mid-strike, actually caught it, fingers closing around a limb moving fast enough that no ordinary human reflex should have been able to intercept it, and used the young warrior's own momentum to pivot, sweep his legs, and put him flat on his back in the dirt with an impact that knocked the breath clean out of him. Silence fell across the training ground, so sudden and so total that Naruto could hear his own ragged breathing echoing back at him from the surrounding cliffs. Ryuk lay in the dirt, staring up at him, golden eyes wide with something that had moved well past surprise and into genuine shock. Naruto stood over him, chest heaving, hands still faintly, strangely glowing with that same soft, moon-pale light he first seen in the ceiling chamber, and for a moment neither of them moved at all. Then, slowly, deliberately, Naruto extended his free hand down toward his fallen opponent. "Good fight," he said, breathing hard but grinning through it. "You almost had me there." Like, seriously almost. Ryuk stared at the offered hand for a long moment, pride and confusion, and something harder to name all warring visibly across his sharp features, before, finally, reluctantly, he reached up and let Naruto haul him back to his feet. "You cheated," Ryuk said, though there was no real heat left in it. "That was not merely reflex. That was moonblood instinct. You are not supposed to have access to that yet, not without training, not without—" "Hey, I didn't even know I had it until about 2 minutes ago," Naruto said. "Believe me, I'm just as confused as you are." Tsukikage stepped forward into the ring then, silver-white fur catching the impossible moonlight, and when the elder sentinel spoke, his voice carried across the entire silent crowd with the weight of something official, something historic. "The trial of Fam," he declared, "is complete. Naruto Uzumaki has met challenge after challenge with strength, with instinct, and more importantly, with the will to rise again each time he was struck down. The first trial recognizes him." A moment of stunned silence held the crowd, and then, slowly, building from somewhere near the back and spreading forward through the assembled ranks, a low, approving rumble began. Thousands of throats joining together into something that wasn't quite a cheer, not in any human sense, but carried the same unmistakable weight of respect being earned in real time. Naruto, standing bruised and bleeding and grinning in the center of that vast, ancient crowd, felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. "They're actually starting to believe in me," he thought, and the thought hit harder than any of Ryuk's strikes had. Ryuk, for his part, was still eyeing Naruto with an expression caught somewhere between grudging respect and stubborn, wounded pride, rubbing at his ribs where Naruto's earlier hit had clearly left a mark. "Do not think this changes my opinion of you," Ryuk said, though the words carried noticeably less conviction than they might have an hour earlier. "One trial proves nothing. There are 2 more ahead of you, human, and they will not be so easily won with fists and stubbornness alone." "Is that a threat or a promise?" Naruto shot back, still grinning despite the ache in every muscle he owned. "Consider it a warning," Ryuk said, but as he turned to go, There was the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth that might, on a less proud warrior, have been the beginning of something almost like a smile. Tsukikage watched the exchange with quiet, ancient patience, and when Naruto finally turned back to him, bruised and exhausted and buzzing with the strange, lingering echo of that moonlit instinct still humming faintly beneath his skin, the elder sentinel inclined his massive head in something that felt, for the first time, genuinely close to respect. "You have passed the first trial," Tsukikage said. "But do not mistake this victory for the hardest part of what lies ahead." "There's tougher stuff coming?" Naruto asked, wincing as he rolled his aching shoulder. "The second trial does not test your body," Tsukikage said, voice dropping lower, more solemn, the earlier warmth of the crowd's approval fading into something considerably heavier. "It tests your mind, your heart. What you carry inside you, hidden even from yourself. The ancient beast sages do not concern themselves with strength, Naruto Uzumaki. They concern themselves with truth." Something in the way he said it sent a small chill down Naruto's spine, cutting straight through the lingering adrenaline of victory. "That sounds a lot scarier than getting punched by a giant wolf guy," he admitted. "It should," Tsukikage said. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, you walk into the sage's domain, and what waits for you there will test parts of yourself you have spent a very long time trying not to look at too closely." Naruto didn't sleep much that night. He'd been given a small stone chamber near the edge of the settlement to rest in, carved, like everything else in the valley, with looping wolf motifs along the walls, a bed of woven reeds and soft furs that was honestly more comfortable than his own mattress back in Konoha. But comfort wasn't the problem. His mind was too loud, replaying the fight against Ryuk over and over, that strange pulling sensation in his chest, the crowd's slow shift from skepticism to something like belief. And underneath all of it, quieter but persistent, was Tsukikage's warning. "The second trial does not test your body. It tests your mind. Your heart. What you carry inside you, hidden even from yourself." Naruto had spent a lot of years getting very good at not thinking about certain things. The stares. The whispers that stopped whenever he walked into a room. The birthdays nobody remembered except Irika, most years. He'd built an entire personality out of grinning through it, being loud enough that the quiet parts underneath didn't have room to surface. Something about the way the elder sentinel had said heart made him suspect that particular strategy wasn't going to work here. By the time the strange, silver false dawn crept over the valley's cliffs, Naruto had given up on sleep entirely and was sitting outside his chamber's entrance, watching a pair of pups wrestle in the pale blue grass, when Tsukikage's familiar bulk came padding up the path toward him. "You look as though you did not rest," the elder sentinel observed. "Couldn't really turn my brain off," Naruto admitted. "Kept thinking about what you said. About the trial testing what I'm hiding, or whatever." "Then you already understand more about what's coming than most candidates do at this stage," Tsukikage said. "That is not nothing. Doesn't make me feel any better about it." "No," Tsukikage agreed. "It likely will not." They walked in relative silence toward the far edge of the valley, where the cliffs curved inward to form a narrow, shadowed gorge that seemed to swallow the strange silver moonlight the moment they stepped into it. The change was immediate and unsettling, the warm, lived-in atmosphere of the settlement giving way to something colder, older, heavier, like walking into a room where a very serious conversation had just stopped the moment you opened the door. "The sages do not live among the pack," Tsukikage explained as they walked. "They have not, for longer than even I can properly remember. Their work requires distance, perspective the rest of us are not always capable of holding." "What exactly do they do, though? Like, what's their whole deal?" "They are the keepers of memory and truth," Tsukikage said. "Older than the Dominion itself, in ways even our oldest histories only partially explain. They do not fight. They do not rule. But no Alpha King in our history has ever taken the throne without first standing before them and being seen fully. Without the ability to hide." Naruto swallowed. "That sounds even worse than you made it sound yesterday." "It is meant to." The gorge opened, finally, into a wide clearing ringed by ancient, twisted trees unlike anything in the valley below, trees with bark the color of old bone, leaves so pale they seemed to glow faintly even without the moon's help. At the clearing's center sat a circle of standing stones, and between them, waiting, were figures Naruto's mind struggled for a moment to properly categorize. They were wolf-shaped, in the loosest possible sense, but ancient in a way that made even Tsukikage look young and vigorous by comparison, fur gone entirely silver-white and thin in places, revealing skin beneath that seemed to shimmer faintly, like moonlight caught under water. There were 5 of them, seated in a loose circle, and every single pair of eyes among them was closed. "Are they asleep?" Naruto whispered. "They are waiting," Tsukikage said. "Approach the circle, Naruto Uzumaki. And remember, whatever you see within it, however real it feels, cannot harm your body. Only your resolve." That was, somehow, not remotely as reassuring as it was probably meant to be. Now, if you've been watching this series from the start, you already know Naruto spent his whole life burying things he doesn't like to think about under a mountain of grins and loud noise. Well, turns out these ancient wolf sages have exactly 0 patience for that particular defense mechanism. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens next is going to peel back a few layers most people never get to see. Naruto stepped forward into the circle of stones, and the moment he crossed some invisible threshold, all 5 ancient wolves opened their eyes at once. Their gazes weren't gold, like Tsukikage's or Ryuk's or every other moon wolf he'd seen so far. They were a deep, pale silver, almost white, and looking into them felt less like meeting someone's eyes and more like standing at the edge of something very deep and very old, staring down into it without any clear sense of the bottom. "Naruto Uzumaki," one of them said, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere in the clearing at once rather than from any single mouth. "The seal's chosen. Blood of the first alpha, though buried deep and long asleep." That's me, yeah," Naruto said, doing his best to sound braver than he currently felt. "You have proven strength of body," said a second voice, distinct from the first but carrying that same layered, ancient quality. "The trial of mind does not ask for strength. It asks for truth. Do you consent to be seen?" Naruto glanced back at Tsukikage, who offered nothing but a small, steady nod. "Yeah," Naruto said, turning back to face the circle, squaring his shoulders despite the nervous churn in his stomach. "I consent." "Bring it on." "Then close your eyes," all 5 voices said together, "and open something else instead." The clearing dissolved. Naruto didn't feel himself fall, exactly. More like the world simply rearranged itself around him without bothering to ask permission. The ancient trees and standing stones dissolving into a scene he recognized instantly, painfully, viscerally, because it was one he'd lived through more times than he could count. He was standing in the academy playground. Small, younger than he was now, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big that he'd had to grow into. Around him, other kids were playing, laughing, chasing each other across the packed dirt, and Naruto, small Naruto, past Naruto, a version of himself he'd worked very hard for years to stop thinking about, stood at the edge of it all, alone, watching. He knew, on some level, that he was watching a memory. He knew it wasn't really happening, not right now, not really. But the ache in his small chest, replayed in perfect, merciless detail, felt exactly as real as it had the first time. "Hey, can I play too?" Small Naruto's voice, higher and thinner than his current one, calling out to a cluster of kids nearby. They didn't even look at him. One of them, a boy Naruto vaguely remembered, though the memory of the name had long since faded, muttered something to the kid next to him, and the whole group moved a little further away, closing ranks, leaving small Naruto standing by himself at the edge of a game he wasn't going to be allowed to join. Present-day Naruto felt his jaw tighten, old, familiar hurt rising up sharp and unwelcome. "You don't have to watch this," said one of the layered sage voices, gentle now, carrying none of the earlier formality. "But you cannot look away from it either, not truly, not if you wish to move past it." "I know how this one ends," Naruto said, voice tighter than he wanted it to be. "I go home. I eat by myself. I pretend it doesn't matter. Same as always. Does it not matter?" It mattered, Naruto admitted, quiet, the memory version of the playground shifting subtly around him, blurring at the edges into other memories, other versions of the same ache stacked one on top of another, empty birthday tables, doors closing a little too quickly when he walked into shops, the particular weight of being looked at by an entire village and seen as something other than a person. It mattered a lot. I just got good at pretending it didn't, because if I let it matter every single time, I don't think I would have made it this far. The scene shifted again, The playground dissolving into the academy itself, into a classroom where a much younger Naruto sat alone at the back, ignored by the teacher's questions, ignored by the other students' study groups, drawing something restless and angry across the corner of his notebook while pretending very hard not to care. You built armor, another sage voice observed, out of noise. Out of grins. Out of the loudest version of yourself you could construct, so that no one, not even you, would have to look too closely at what was underneath it. Yeah, well, Naruto said, throat tight, worked pretty well, didn't it? I'm still standing. Still trying. Still gonna be Hokage someday, no matter what anybody says. That is not in question, the voice said, not unkindly. What is in question is whether the boy beneath the armor has ever been permitted to simply feel what happened to him, rather than perform his way past it. Naruto didn't have an answer for that. The memory classroom held around him, small Naruto still scribbling in the corner of his notebook, and present-day Naruto found himself, despite every instinct screaming to look away, unable to do anything but watch. The scene shifted again, and this time it was worse. Not a specific memory this time, but something more like a compressed echo of 100 smaller ones layered together. The particular way certain villagers' eyes would follow him down the street, cold and wary and full of something he hadn't fully understood as a child but understood with painful clarity now. A birthday, alone, a single candle on a store-bought cake he bought for himself because there was no one else who was going to. The third Hokage's face, kind but always a little sad, always carrying some weight Naruto had never been given the full explanation for. You have spent your entire life, said the layered sage voice, quieter now, convinced that if you simply try hard enough, grin loud enough, prove yourself enough times, the loneliness will eventually stop mattering. That it will simply wear away, given enough effort. Isn't that how it's supposed to work? Naruto's voice cracked slightly on the question, and he hated it, hated how small it sounded even here, even in a memory that wasn't fully real. You just keep trying, keep pushing. Eventually people see you for who you actually are instead of whatever they've decided you are. Some of it will change, the voice said. Some of it already has. You carry precious few true bonds, Naruto Uzumaki, but the ones you do carry are real, and they matter more than the crowd of strangers who never gave you a chance. Sakura Haruno. Iruka Yamano. Even in his own guarded way, Sasuke Uchiha. These are not nothing. I know that, Naruto said, and meant it. I do know that. I'm not trying to say my life is all bad or whatever. I've got people. I've got a village I'm gonna protect no matter what any of them think of me. And yet, the voice pressed, gently, relentlessly, beneath all of it, there remains a wound that has never been permitted to simply be a wound. Only ever something to grin past, push through, bury beneath noise. We do not ask you to abandon your strength, child. We ask only that you stop mistaking the burying of pain for the healing of it. Naruto stood in the middle of that layered, aching memory space, and for the first time in longer than he could easily remember, he let himself simply stop performing. Stopped grinning, stopped reaching for the next loud, deflecting joke. It hurt, he said, quiet, to no one and everyone at once. All of it. The staring. The empty apartment. Nobody ever explaining why, just letting me feel it without ever telling me what I supposedly did to deserve it. It hurt a lot, and I got so good at pretending it didn't that I think I forgot how to just let it hurt, sometimes, without immediately trying to fix it or laugh past it. The memory space around him seemed to soften at the admission, the harsh edges of remembered loneliness losing some of their sharpness, though none of their weight. That, the sage voice said, is truth. That is what this trial asks of you. Not that you become someone new, but that you stop hiding the parts of yourself that already exist. A king who cannot acknowledge his own wounds will, in time, fail to recognize them in those he leads. This is not weakness, Naruto Uzumaki. This is the beginning of wisdom. If this is hitting close to home for anyone watching, you're not alone in that. And hey, if you need to pause here and take a breath before continuing, that's okay too. We'll be here when you're ready. But there's one more piece to this trial. And it's about to ask Naruto a question a lot harder than how does it feel. The scene shifted one final time, and this one wasn't memory at all. Naruto could tell immediately, the air around him carrying a different, heavier quality, something constructed rather than recalled. He stood in a version of the academy playground again, but wrong this time, subtly distorted, and across from him stood a boy his own age, cloaked in shadow thick enough that Naruto couldn't make out any features beyond a vague, hunched silhouette. "Who's that?" Naruto asked warily. "A choice," the layered sage voice answered. "Not a memory. A possibility. Watch." The shadowed boy lifted his head, and Naruto felt a chill move through him as a voice, young, bitter, painfully familiar in its cadence despite belonging to no one he actually knew, spoke out of the darkness. "They never gave me a chance either," the shadow boy said. "Not once. Not ever. Everyone who looked at me saw a monster before they ever bothered looking for a person. So I stopped trying to prove them wrong. I decided if that's all they'd ever see, I might as well become it. Might as well make them regret every single time they looked away." Naruto felt something cold settle in his stomach, recognizing, with uncomfortable clarity, the shape of a road he'd come close to more than once in his own darkest, loneliest moments. A road paved with every legitimate grievance he actually carried, leading somewhere he'd always, stubbornly, refused to let himself go. "This is what I could have been," Naruto said slowly, understanding dawning. "If I'd made different choices. If I'd let the anger win instead of just pushing through it. This is one thread among many that could have been woven from the same wounds you carry," the sage voice confirmed. "The trial does not ask whether you have been hurt, Naruto Uzumaki. Every candidate who has ever stood in this circle carried wounds of some kind. It asks what you choose to build atop them." The shadow boy took a step closer, voice dropping into something almost pleading, almost persuasive. "You could stop pretending it's fine. Stop performing forgiveness for people who never earned it. They hurt you for years and never once apologized. Why should you be the one working so hard to be understanding about it? Let it out. Let them see what they made." For a moment, just a moment, Naruto felt the pull of it. The old anger, the years of unfair treatment, the ache of every birthday spent alone and every door that closed a little too fast. All of it rising up together, offering itself as fuel for something that would feel, in the short term, like relief. Then he thought of Iruka-sensei, staying late after the worst of his academy days to make sure he actually ate dinner. Of Sakura, annoying and impatient and there anyway, every single mission. Of the third Hokage's tired, kind eyes, carrying a weight Naruto hadn't understood but had always somehow trusted wasn't malicious. Of Tsukikage, and Vargas, and even prickly, skeptical Yuki, an entire valley of strangers who'd looked at him for less than a full day and already seen more potential in him than half of Konoha had managed in 12 years. "No," Naruto said, and the word came out steadier than he expected, steadier than he felt. "I get why you're angry. I get it completely. Believe me, I've felt every bit of that anger myself. But turning into the thing they were always scared of doesn't prove them wrong. It just proves them right, eventually, even if it takes the long way around to get there." He straightened, meeting the shadow boy's obscured gaze directly. "I'd rather spend my whole life proving them wrong the hard way, by being someone worth trusting, than take the easy way out and give them exactly what they were always afraid of." The shadow boy held Naruto's gaze for a long moment, and then, slowly, without any dramatic collapse or violent resistance, simply faded, dissolving back into the pale, twisted trees and standing stones of the sage's clearing, the illusion releasing its hold all at once. Naruto blinked, and found himself back in the circle of ancient stones, the 5 sages watching him with those deep, layered silver eyes, and for the first time since the trial began, something in their ancient expressions had shifted into what might, on faces so old and strange, have been approval. "You have passed the trial of mind," they said together, voices settling back into their earlier formal cadence. "Not because you carry no wounds, every worthy king carries wounds, but because you have chosen, again and again, to build something other than vengeance atop them. This is rarer than strength, Naruto Uzumaki. Rarer, and considerably more valuable to those who will one day call you their king." Naruto let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for the better part of an hour, legs suddenly a little unsteady beneath him. The emotional weight of everything he'd just relived, everything he'd finally allowed himself to actually feel instead of grin past, settling heavy and exhausting across his shoulders. Tsukikage was there almost immediately, steadying him with a solid, warm presence at his side. You did well, the elder sentinel said, quiet enough that it felt like it was meant only for Naruto to hear. Better than most candidates who have stood in that circle before you. That was... Naruto shook his head, still catching his breath. That was way harder than fighting Ryuk. Like, way harder. The body heals faster than the heart, Tsukikage said. This is a truth as old as our dominion itself. He paused, studying Naruto with something that had shifted, subtly but unmistakably, into genuine warmth. One trial remains. And this one, I think, may prove to be the trial you are, in many ways, already best prepared for. Yeah? What's the last one? The trial of the pack, Tsukikage said. It is not enough to be strong. It is not enough to know your own heart. A king must also earn the loyalty of those he would lead, not through a title granted by a seal, but through action, in a crisis that asks everything of him at once. The elder sentinel's golden eyes glinted with something that might have been anticipation. Rest tonight, Naruto Uzumaki. Tomorrow, you do not fight for yourself. Tomorrow, you fight for others, and the pack will be watching to see exactly what kind of king that makes you. Naruto woke before dawn, or before whatever passed for dawn in a valley lit by a moon that never seemed to move, feeling more rested than he expected after everything the trial of mind had dredged up the day before. There was a strange lightness in his chest that hadn't been there before, like something that had been clenched tight for years had finally been allowed to loosen its grip, even just a little. He was still turning that feeling over in his head, poking at it the way you'd poke at a bruise to see if it still hurt, when a knock, or the wolf equivalent, a firm scrape of claws against stone, sounded at his chamber entrance. It was Ryuk. You're up early, Naruto said, surprised. After yesterday's trial, he hadn't expected to see the prickly young warrior again until the final trial forced them back into the same space. Elder Vargas sent me, Ryuk said, though something in his posture suggested that wasn't the whole reason. There's trouble at the valley's northern border. He thought you should see it before the final trial begins, since, unless I'm mistaken, it's about to become the final trial itself. That got Naruto's full attention. Wait, what kind of trouble? The kind that's been getting worse for 3 nights running, Ryuk said, already turning to lead the way. Come. See for yourself. They moved quickly through the settlement, the pale blue grass and curved stone buildings blurring past as Ryuk set a punishing pace toward the valley's northern edge. Naruto kept up as best he could, still feeling the lingering ache of yesterday's trials and muscles that hadn't fully recovered, but pushed the discomfort aside. Something in Ryuk's tension told him this wasn't the moment to complain about sore ribs. They crested a low ridge, and Naruto got his first look at what had the young warrior so on edge. Below them, where the valley's silverlit basin gave way to a darker, wilder stretch of forest hugging the northern cliffs, the trees themselves looked wrong. Twisted, their pale bark gone a sickly gray-black in patches, as though something had been slowly poisoning the ground beneath them. And moving between those twisted trunks, half glimpsed in the shadows, were shapes that made the hair on Naruto's arms stand straight up. They looked like wolves, vaguely, distantly, the way a nightmare looks vaguely like a memory of something real, but wrong in every detail. Gone patchy and matted, more shadow than substance in places, eyes burning a sickly red-black instead of the warm gold of every moon wolf Naruto had met so far. Even from this distance, he could feel something radiating off them, a wrongness that prickled against his skin like static. What are those things? Naruto breathed. Shadow beasts, Ryuk said, voice tight. Corrupted things. They don't belong to any natural order. Not moon wolf, not ordinary beast. Something twisted out of shape by whatever dark undercurrents still linger at the edges of these mountains. They've never come this close to the settlement before. Not in my lifetime. How many? Enough, Ryuk said grimly. A den's worth, at minimum. Maybe more nesting deeper in the twisted wood. Scouts have tracked their numbers growing for 3 nights now, and tonight, he hesitated. Tonight what? Tonight, the elders believe they'll push toward the settlement itself. There are pups in the outer dens, Naruto. Families. If the shadow beasts break through the tree-line in force, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Naruto's stomach had already gone cold at the implication. So what's the plan? Naruto asked. You've got warriors, right? An army of moonwolves. This can't be the first threat you've ever dealt with. It isn't, Ryuk said. But the elders have decided this crisis will serve as your final trial. If you're truly meant to lead this pack, they want to see how you lead them through this. Not a staged fight in a ring with rules and an audience, but something real. Something with actual lives on the line. Naruto's jaw tightened. Somewhere behind him, he heard familiar heavy footsteps, and turned to find Tsukikage approaching, expression grave even by the elder sentinel's usual solemn standards. "This is not a trial we chose lightly," Tsukikage said without preamble. "But the timing serves a purpose greater than convenience. A candidate who thrives in a ring built for spectacle is not the same as one who can lead the pack through genuine danger. Tonight, when the shadow beasts move, you will lead a defense of the northern border, not alone, but not coddled either. The choices you make, the wolves you rally, the way you carry yourself when the stakes are real rather than ceremonial. This is what the trial of the pack asks of you. And if I mess it up?" Naruto asked quietly. "If I make the wrong call and somebody gets hurt because of it?" Tsukikage's golden eyes held his, steady and unflinching. "Then you will have learned, in the hardest possible way, precisely the weight a crown carries. That lesson, too, is part of the trial, whether you pass or fail it. No pressure, right? Just an ancient wolf civilization's actual lives hanging on whether Naruto can lead a real battle instead of just winning a staged fight. If you're new here, subscribe and get that bell on, because this next stretch is where things start getting genuinely dangerous." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Naruto met with a rotating cast of Moon Wolf warriors, scouts reporting fresh sign of Shadow Beast movement, elder tacticians sketching rough maps of the northern treeline into the dirt with careful claws, young fighters eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and open skepticism that reminded him uncomfortably of his first days at the academy. He also met, for the first time, the wolves who would eventually become the elite Alpha Guard, though nobody used that title yet, not until a king actually sat the throne to grant it. Fenrik, the broad-shouldered warrior Naruto had spotted from the cliffside on his first day in the valley, turned out to be blunt, gruff, and entirely uninterested in pleasantries. "You've got good instincts, from what I hear about the ring," he said, sizing Naruto up with an expression that gave away nothing. "Instincts and actual battlefield leadership are different animals, boy. We'll see which one you've actually got tonight." Selene, lean and quick-eyed, seemed more curious than skeptical, circling Naruto once with obvious appraisal before offering a considerably warmer greeting. "I've scouted the Shadow Beast dens myself the past 2 nights," she said. "I can get you eyes on their numbers and movement faster than anyone else in the valley. Use me right, and you'll know exactly what you're facing before it ever reaches the treeline." And Baylor, massive, slow-moving, armored and naturally thick, layered hide that made even Fenrik look comparatively delicate, said almost nothing at all, only offering a single, solemn nod that somehow communicated more steady reassurance than a full speech might have. Naruto found himself, over the course of that long afternoon, doing something he wasn't entirely used to, listening, really listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk, absorbing every scrap of tactical knowledge these wolves who'd spent their entire lives defending this valley were willing to share, filing it away, turning it over against everything he already knew about combat, about leading a team, about the dozens of small lessons Kakashi had tried to drill into Team 7 that Naruto usually only half absorbed in the moment. This isn't like sparring with Sasuke, he thought, watching Selene sketch a rough map of the Shadowwoods terrain into the dirt. This is real. People are actually counting on me to get this right. The thought should have terrified him. In a way it did. But underneath the fear was something else, something steadier. The same stubborn resolve that had carried him through every trial, every humiliation, every moment Konoha had ever told him he wasn't enough. "I've been underestimated my whole life," he thought. Time to prove, for real this time, that it was never true. As the strange, permanent twilight of the valley deepened towards something closer to true night, the enormous silver moon overhead dimming subtly, as though even it observed some cycle Naruto didn't fully understand, the warriors began to gather at the northern treeline in genuine numbers. Dozens of moon wolves in fighting formation, more emerging from the settlement behind them with every passing minute, drawn by word of the coming battle. Ryuk fell into step beside Naruto as they approached the front lines, expression unusually serious, all his earlier prickly bravado stripped away by the weight of what was coming. "For what it's worth," Ryuk said quietly, "whatever happens tonight, You've already earned more respect from this pack than I expected to give a human outsider 3 days ago. Don't let that go to your head. But don't discount it either. That almost sounded like a compliment, Naruto said, managing a small grin despite the tension coiling in his stomach. Don't get used to it, Ryuk said, though the corner of his mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile but was heading in that general direction. Ahead, at the very edge of the twisted tree line, Fenrik, Selene, and Baylor were already organizing the assembled warriors into rough formations, and beyond them, in the deepening shadows of the thick, blackened forest, Naruto could see, and feel, movement building. Dozens of those wrong, shadow-warped eyes, burning sickly red in the dark, gathering in numbers that made his earlier estimate of a den's worth feel like a significant undercount. Tsukiki's massive form settled at Naruto's side, golden eyes fixed on the gathering threat. The choice of formation, of strategy, of where to commit our strongest fighters and where to hold defensive lines, this falls to you tonight, Naruto Uzumaki, the elder sentinel said. I will not command in your place. Nor will Fenrik, or Selene, or Baylor, skilled as they are. Tonight, the pack looks to you. Naruto swallowed hard, staring out at the growing tide of shadow beasts beginning to emerge from between the twisted trees, dozens of pairs of expectant golden eyes turning toward him from every side. Okay, he thought, steadying himself, drawing on every scrap of tactical instinct he'd absorbed over the long afternoon, every lesson Kakashi had ever tried to teach him about reading a battlefield, every stubborn refusal to back down that had carried him this far already. You wanted this. You said you'd prove yourself? So prove it. For real this time. He turned to Selene first. You said you scouted their den. Do they favor pushing straight through the center? Or do they try to flank around the edges of the tree line? Center push? Historically, Selene answered immediately, clearly pleased to be asked. But their numbers tonight are heavier than anything I've tracked before. I wouldn't put flanking past them, not with a force this size. Naruto nodded, mind already working through the problem the way he'd work through a puzzle, turning it over, looking for the angle nobody else had considered yet. Then we don't hold one solid line, he said, the plan forming even as he spoke it aloud. Fenrik, I want you and your strongest fighters holding the center. That's where they're most likely to commit the heaviest numbers, and we need something that can absorb that without breaking. Baylor, he glanced at the massive, armored warrior, can you and a smaller group hold the eastern flank? If Selene's right that they might try flanking, we can't leave that side undefended, but we also can't spread ourselves too thin everywhere at once. Baylor gave a single, solid nod. Selene, I want you running the western flank with a fast strike team. If they do try to flank, I want early warning and I want you fast enough to redirect fighters wherever the actual pressure ends up landing. And Ryuk, Naruto turned to the young warrior, who straightened slightly at being singled out, you're with me. We hold a mobile reserve behind the center line. Anywhere the formation starts to buckle, that's where we go. There was a beat of silence as the assembled warriors absorbed the plan, and then, one by one, nods of approval rippled through the gathered ranks. Even Fenrik, gruff and skeptical, gave a short, satisfied grunt that Naruto had come to understand, over the course of the day, was about as close to genuine approval as the broad-shouldered warrior tended to offer. Not bad, Ryuk murmured, low enough that only Naruto could hear. Actually, not bad at all. Don't sound so surprised, Naruto shot back, though the small flicker of relief in his own chest suggested he'd half expected to be laughed out of the formation. Tsukikage, watching the exchange with quiet, ancient patience, said nothing at all, but something in the elder sentinel's golden eyes carried a weight that felt, unmistakably, like approval. Out in the darkness of the twisted forest, the shadow beast's burning red eyes multiplied, and a low, wrong growl began to build across the entire tree line, rising steadily towards something that was very clearly the opening note of an assault. Positions! Naruto shouted, and felt something settle into place in his chest as dozens of moon wolves moved instantly, without hesitation, to obey. And there it is, Naruto's first real taste of actual command, and the pack's already starting to trust him with it. But planning a formation is one thing. Surviving what's about to come out of that tree line is a completely different problem. Let's see how it holds up. The shadow beasts hit the center line first, exactly as Selene had predicted, a surging black tide of wrong, matted fur and burning red eyes crashing against Fenric's formation with a force that Naruto felt in his own chest even from his position several dozen yards back. The center held barely, Fenric's warriors meeting the assault with a coordinated ferocity that spoke of years, decades, maybe centuries of practiced defense. Claws and fangs meeting shadow-warped flesh in a chaos of snarls and impact that filled the twilight air with noise. Naruto watched, tense, tracking the ebb and flow of the fighting with an intensity that surprised even himself, cataloging every place the line bent, every spot where a moon wolf warrior stumbled or a shadow beast pushed through further than it should have. There, he said suddenly, pointing toward a section of the center line where 3 moon wolves had become separated from the main formation, shadow beasts pressing in on them from 2 sides at once. Ryuk with me. They moved together, Naruto's borrowed instinct. That strange, moon-pale pull he first felt during the trial of Fang, flaring hot in his chest as he closed the distance, driving a fist into the nearest shadow beast's flank hard enough to send it staggering back with a shriek that sounded wrong in ways no natural animal's cry should sound. Ryuk moved beside him, claws flashing, the 2 of them falling into a rough, instinctive rhythm despite having never fought as a pair before tonight. Left! Naruto shouted, catching a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye, and Ryuk pivoted without hesitation, intercepting a strike that would have caught one of the separated warriors from behind. They fought their way through, pulling the isolated moon wolves back into the main formation, and Naruto felt a fierce, satisfied grin spreading across his face despite the danger. Despite the sweat and the ache already building in his muscles. This is working, he thought. We're actually holding. That was, of course, exactly when everything got worse. A horn, or the wolf equivalent, a sharp, rising howl carried down from the western flank, cut through the chaos of the center fighting, and Naruto's head snapped around in time to see Selene's fast strike team suddenly, desperately outmatched. A second wave of shadow beasts pouring out from the western treeline in numbers that dwarfed anything the scouts had tracked before. They found a second den, Ryuk said grimly, following Naruto's gaze. Or they were hiding numbers deliberately. Naruto's mind raced, the careful formation he'd built starting to strain under pressure it hadn't been designed to handle. If he pulled Fenric's fighters from the center to reinforce the west, the center would buckle. If he left the west to fend for itself, Selene's team would be overrun. Think, he told himself, forcing down the rising panic, forcing his mind back into the same focused clarity that had let him build the original plan. There's gotta be an answer here. Baylor's east flank, he said suddenly. Has it seen any real pressure? Light skirmishing, nothing serious, Ryuk confirmed. The bulk of their numbers push center and west. Then Baylor can spare fighters. Naruto was already moving, cutting across the battlefield toward the eastern position, Ryuk close behind. Baylor, I need half your line, now. Redirect west, reinforce Selene before that flank collapses. The massive warrior didn't hesitate, didn't question, simply nodded and began peeling off warriors with an efficiency that spoke of complete, immediate trust. Trust that made Naruto's chest tighten with something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite fear, but sat somewhere uncomfortably close to both at once. The reinforcements arrived at the western flank just as Selene's line was beginning to genuinely buckle, and Naruto watched, breath caught tight in his chest, as the tide of the fighting shifted, slowly, painfully, back towards something resembling control. But the cost was already becoming clear. With Baylor's eastern line thinned, the shadow beasts, whether through some crude collective instinct or something more deliberately coordinated, began redirecting pressure precisely toward the weakened eastern flank, testing the gap Naruto's redistribution had opened. They're adapting, Ryuk said, alarm plain in his voice. These things don't usually show that kind of coordination. Yeah, well, tonight's apparently full of surprises, Naruto muttered, already moving again, mind racing through the shrinking list of options. He thought of Kakashi, of every lesson about reading a battlefield holistically instead of reactively, of not just plugging holes as they appeared but anticipating where the next one would open before it did. He thought of Irika's old lectures about teamwork, about how the strongest formation wasn't the one with the most powerful individual fighters, but the one that moved and adapted as a single coordinated whole. Ryuk, he said suddenly, I need you to get to Fenric. Tell him to pull the center into a tighter defensive knot, not retreat, just consolidate, bias density instead of spread. It'll cost him ground, but it'll free up enough fighters that I can build a second reserve force to plug the eastern gap before it actually breaks. That's going to look like weakness to them, Ryuk warned. A tightening center might invite exactly the kind of push you're trying to avoid. Maybe, Naruto admitted. But it's better than the alternative. Go, now, we don't have time to debate it. Ryuk hesitated for one more half-second, and then, decisively, without further argument, turned and sprinted toward Fenric's position. Naruto stood alone for a moment amid the chaos of the battlefield, shadow beasts snarling and lunging in every direction, moon wolf warriors fighting with everything they had, and felt the full, crushing weight of the decision he just made pressing down on his shoulders. If this doesn't work, he thought, people are gonna get hurt because of a call I made. There was no time to dwell on the fear. He forced it down, the same way he'd forced down every doubt his entire life, and threw himself back into the fighting, pulling together whatever scattered warriors he could reach into the beginning of a makeshift reserve force to shore up the straining eastern line. This is the moment every leader eventually faces, the point where the plan meets reality, and reality doesn't care how good the plan looked on paper. Let's see if Naruto's instincts are actually as sharp as everyone's starting to believe. The next several minutes blurred together into a chaos of impact and adrenaline. Naruto fighting alongside a growing knot of reserve warriors, plugging gaps as they opened, watching with fierce, desperate attention as Fenric's tightened center formation held despite Ryuk's warning, the increased density actually allowing the moon wolves there to support each other more effectively than the original spread formation had. Slowly, agonizingly, the tide began to turn. The eastern flank stabilized under the weight of Naruto's hastily assembled reserves. The western line, reinforced by Baylor's redirected fighters, pushed the surging shadow beasts back toward the tree line. And at the center, Fenric's consolidated formation held firm against everything the corrupted creatures threw at it. But shadow beasts kept coming, wave after wave, and Naruto could feel exhaustion beginning to drag at his limbs, the strange moon-pale instinct in his chest flaring and dimming unpredictably as he pushed himself harder than he had in either of the previous trials combined. It was during one particularly brutal exchange, 3 shadow beasts converging on him at once, having apparently identified him, correctly, as something worth specifically targeting, that things nearly went very wrong. Naruto ducked the first strike, twisted away from the second, and was already too committed to a countering motion to fully avoid the third, claws raking across his shoulder hard enough to send fresh, sharp pain lancing down his arm and knock him staggering off balance, momentarily exposed to the full weight of all 3 creatures at once. He had just enough time to think, with startling clarity, this is bad, before a blur of silver-white fur slammed into the nearest shadow beast, driving it back with a snarl fierce enough to make the corrupted creature actually flinch. Ryuk, having apparently doubled back the moment his message reached Fenric, planted himself squarely at Naruto's side, claws raised, expression fierce. Told you not to get used to compliments, Ryuk said, breathing hard, but I'm not about to let you die on the same night I finally started respecting you. Get up! Naruto, despite the pain, despite the exhaustion dragging at every muscle, felt a fierce grin spread across his face as he pushed himself back to his feet. Wouldn't dream of dying now, he said. We've got a battle to win, remember? Together, they turned to face the remaining shadow beasts, fighting back to back with a coordination that felt, despite everything, like something that had been building between them since that very first exchange in the trial of Fong. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though Naruto would later learn it had been closer to 45 minutes. A brutal, grinding fight of adjustment and readjustment, of formations bending and holding and bending again, of Naruto calling shifts and redirections with a growing confidence that surprised even him, drawing on every scrap of tactical instinct he'd absorbed that long afternoon, and every stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried him through every hardship Konoha had ever handed him. And slowly, inexorably, the shadow beasts' numbers began to thin. Whatever had driven them to mass in such unprecedented force finally seemed to break against the sheer, coordinated resilience of the defense Naruto had built, and as the last stragglers finally retreated back into the twisted depths of the northern forest, a ragged, exhausted cheer began to rise up from the assembled moon wolf warriors. Relief and triumph tangled together into a sound that rolled across the battered tree line like a wave. Naruto stood amid the aftermath, breathing hard, bleeding from a half-dozen shallow wounds, watching as warriors checked on each other, as the wounded were gathered and tended, as the settlement's outer dens, the pups, the families Ryuk had been so afraid for, remained safe behind a line that had, ultimately, held. Nobody had died. A fact that settled into Naruto's chest with a relief so profound it nearly buckled his already shaking legs. Tsukikage approached through the thinning chaos, golden eyes taking in the scene, the held formation, the exhausted but intact warriors, the boy standing at the center of it all, bloodied and swaying on his feet but still standing, still looking out for the wounded around him rather than his own considerable pain. "You held the line," the elder sentinel said, quiet, almost reverent. "We held the line," Naruto corrected, glancing around at Fenrik, at Selene limping but upright, at Baylor's solid, reassuring presence, at Ryuk standing at his side, bloodied and exhausted and, for the first time since they'd met, looking at Naruto without a trace of skepticism at all. "I didn't do any of this alone." Something in Tsukikage's ancient expression shifted at that, a flicker of something that looked, unmistakably, like the answer the elder sentinel had been waiting 3 trials to hear. "That," Tsukikage said, "is precisely the answer of a true Alpha King." The assembled warriors, exhausted and battered but very much alive, began to gather around the scene almost instinctively, drawn by something in the air that felt like the closing of a very old, very long-awaited chapter. Vargas arrived at some point during the gathering, pale gold eyes taking in the scene with an expression that carried real, unguarded emotion for the first time since Naruto had met him. Even sharp-tongued Yuki appeared at the edge of the crowd, her earlier skepticism visibly, genuinely shaken by what she'd witnessed. "Naruto Uzumaki," Tsukikage said, voice rising to carry across the entire gathered crowd, the same way it had on that very first night in the sealing chamber. "You have faced the trial of Fong with strength and unyielding will. You have faced the trial of mind with honesty and hard-won wisdom. And tonight you have faced the trial of the pack, not with the strength of one, but with the strength of many, earned through trust freely given and returned in kind." The elder sentinel drew himself up to his full, imposing height, and around the clearing, every moon wolf present, warriors and elders, scouts and wounded, even Ryuk, bowing his head with a respect that carried no trace of his earlier resentment at all, began, one by one, to lower themselves in a gesture that needed no translation. "By the ancient authority of the Seal of First Ascension," Tsukikage declared, "and by the willing voice of the pack you have proven worthy to lead, I name you Alpha King of the Moonfang Dominion, Commander of the Moon Wolves, Master of the Elite Alpha Guard, Student and Protector of the Ancient Beast Sage's Ancient Trust." The valley itself seemed to answer, a howl rising up from every corner of the settlement at once, thousands of voices joining together in a chorus that Naruto felt in his very bones, the same overwhelming sound that had first called to him from beneath a mountain 3 days, or was it a lifetime, ago. Naruto Uzumaki, orphan, outcast, genin of the Hidden Leaf Village, stood bloodied and exhausted at the center of that vast, ancient howl, and felt something settle into place in his chest that he suspected would never fully leave him again. "Alpha King," he thought, the words still barely feeling real. Believe it! The morning after the battle, Naruto woke to find his shoulder wound already half-healed. He sat up slowly in the reed bed of his chamber, wincing out of habit more than actual pain, and peeled back the edge of the bandage Selene had wrapped around him the night before. The claw marks that should have taken a solid week to close were already scabbed over, faint silver light pulsing faintly beneath the skin around the wound's edges, fading even as he watched. "That's new," he muttered, flexing the shoulder experimentally. It ached, but nowhere near as badly as it should have. A voice from the chamber entrance answered him before he could wonder about it further. "The crown carries more than a title," Tsukikage said, stepping into the doorway, golden eyes taking in Naruto's obvious surprise with something like amusement. "Moonblood heals faster in one who has been formally recognized by the Dominion. You will find a great many things about yourself have shifted since last night, Alpha King. Some subtle, some considerably less so." "Okay, first of all," Naruto said, swinging his legs out of bed, "you gotta stop calling me that so casually, it's still really weird to hear." "You will grow accustomed to it," Tsukikage said, entirely unbothered. "Dress. Eat something. Selene has already prepared a meal for you, tea and roasted fowl, nothing that will trouble your human stomach. Then come to the great den hall. Your elite Alpha Guard awaits formal introduction, and there is a great deal you still do not understand about the responsibilities now resting on your shoulders. Breakfast turned out to be a simple, hearty spread laid out on a low stone table near the edge of the settlement. Roasted fowl seasoned with something sharp and herbal Naruto didn't recognize, flatbread still warm from whatever passed for an oven in Moon Wolf cooking, and a steaming cup of pale golden tea that smelled faintly of the same glowing plants he'd seen tended in the valley's gardens. Celine was waiting for him, perched on the table's edge with the easy, coiled alertness that seemed to be her default state. "Eat," she said before he'd even fully sat down. "You burned through more than you realized last night. Moonblood healing draws heavily on reserves, and yours are still new to the process. You're not gonna let me argue about this, are you?" "No," Celine said, entirely pleasant about it. "I am not." Naruto ate, and found, somewhat to his surprise, that he was ravenous, tearing through the fowl and flatbread with an appetite that rivaled even his usual 3 bowls of ramen standard. Celine watched with quiet satisfaction, occasionally correcting his grip on the unfamiliar eating implements with the patient, faintly exasperated air of someone very used to managing details other people overlooked. "Can I ask you something?" Naruto said between bites. "Last night, during the battle, you didn't hesitate once, even when I redirected half of Baylor's line without really explaining why first. Why'd you just trust the call?" Celine considered the question for a moment, golden eyes thoughtful. "Because you'd already shown, over the course of one afternoon of planning, that you listened. Really listened, not just to be polite, but because you actually wanted to understand the terrain, the numbers, the shape of the threat. A leader who listens before he commands has usually earned the benefit of the doubt by the time the commanding actually starts." She tilted her head. "Also, frankly, we didn't have time to debate it, but I imagine I would have trusted the call regardless." Naruto turned that answer over for a while after she left him to finish his tea alone, something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest. Back in Konoha, trust had always felt like something he had to fight tooth and claw for, inch by grudging inch, and even then it rarely came without some lingering asterisk attached. Here, it seemed, trust could be earned in the space of a single afternoon and a single battle, freely, completely, without reservation. "Maybe it's not that people back home are impossible to win over," he thought, staring down into his cooling tea. "Maybe I just never had a fair shot at proving myself before now." The thought was equal parts comforting and painful, and he pushed it aside for now, finishing his breakfast and heading toward the great den hall before he could get too lost in it. If you're just tuning in, yeah, this is a very different Naruto than the one who left Konoha 3 days ago. And it's about to get even more different, because today he meets the 4 wolves who are about to become the most important people in his new life. Subscribe and get that bell on, because things are only getting bigger from here. The great den hall looked different in daylight, or in the valley's version of it, the enormous silver moon overhead casting its steady, unchanging glow across the open-roofed chambers and laid floor. Where the council of elders had gathered days before, now stood only 4 figures, waiting for him at the hall's center: Fenric, Celine, Baylor, and Ryuk. Tsukikage stood off to one side, and beside him, to Naruto's mild surprise, Vargas had also come, leaning on a gnarled walking staff that Naruto hadn't seen him use before, his scarred, ancient face carrying an expression of quiet, careful attention. "Alpha King," Fenric said, dipping his head in a gesture of formal respect that felt strange coming from the same blunt, gruff warrior who'd sized Naruto up so skeptically just a day earlier. "Formally, then, my name is Fenric. I lead the Dominion's close combat forces, those who meet threats head-on, fang and claw and nothing held back. I have served this valley's defense for longer than most warriors currently living, and I do not offer my respect lightly. You earned mine last night, holding that center line. That means a lot, coming from you," Naruto said, and meant it. "Celine," the scout said next, though her introduction hardly seemed necessary at this point. "I run reconnaissance and rapid strike. If it moves anywhere within these mountains, I generally know about it before anyone else does. Consider me your eyes, Alpha King. Whatever you need scouted, tracked, or found, I'll bring you the truth of it." Baylor, the massive, armored warrior said, voice deep and slow, matching his deliberate, unhurried movements. "Defense. Whatever needs holding, I hold it. Whatever needs shielding, I shield it. I do not speak often. I speak when it matters." "Noted," Naruto said, with a small grin. I'll try not to make you talk more than necessary then. Something that might have been the ghost of a smile flickered across Baylor's otherwise stoic features. And finally, Ryuk stepped forward, some of his old prickliness returning to his posture even as genuine respect shone clearly beneath it. You already know me. Tactics, strategy, second voice to whatever plan needs sharpening before it's put into action. I fought skepticism about you harder than anyone else in this valley, Alpha King, which means, now that I've changed my mind, you can trust that change is genuine. I don't offer respect I don't mean. Good to know, Naruto said. Also good to know I apparently had to punch you into respecting me. Efficient, if nothing else. Do not get used to that particular method, Ryuk said dryly. I do not recommend it as your standard leadership strategy. The small ripple of laughter that moved through the assembled group, even from steady, quiet Baylor, settled something loose and warm in Naruto's chest. This didn't feel like meeting subordinates. It felt oddly like meeting a team. Like meeting people who might, given enough time, actually become something close to friends. Together, Tsukiki said, stepping forward now that the introductions had concluded. These four comprise your elite Alpha Guard, the inner circle every Alpha King has relied upon throughout the Dominion's history. They will train you, advise you, fight at your side when the need arises, and challenge you when your judgment requires challenging. Trust them, Naruto Uzumaki. Few kings have been gifted a guard this capable so early in their reign. Naruto looked around at the four of them, Fenric's blunt steadiness, Selene's sharp alertness, Baylor's quiet, unshakable calm, Ryuk's hard-won respect, and felt something settle into place that reminded him, unexpectedly, powerfully, of the first time Team 7 had actually started to feel like a real team instead of three strangers thrown together by assignment. All right, he said, straightening, some of his usual confident grin returning in full force. So what happens now? Do I, get a throne? A crown? Some kind of official Alpha King outfit? Training happens now, Fenric said flatly, entirely unmoved by the question. You held a defensive line admirably last night, Alpha King, but admirable improvisation is not the same as trained mastery. If you intend to actually lead this pack rather than simply preside over it, you have a great deal to learn. Naruto's grin didn't fade, but it did sharpen into something more determined. Yeah, okay. I can work with that. Where do we start? Training, it turned out, meant something considerably more involved than Naruto had expected. Fenric started with the basics of Moonwolf close combat philosophy, not the improvised instinct that had carried Naruto through the trial of Fang, but a genuine, structured system built around reading an opponent's weight, their breathing, the subtle tells buried in muscle tension before a strike ever committed. It was, Naruto quickly realized, not entirely unlike some of what Kakashi had tried to teach him about reading an opponent's intent, but far more refined, honed over centuries of Moonwolf combat tradition into something with genuine depth. Your body already knows more than your mind does, right now, Fenric said, circling Naruto in a wide training ring not far from where the trial of Fang had taken place days earlier. That flicker of moonblood instinct you felt against Ryuk, that is not something you can consciously summon yet. It comes when it comes, unpredictable, because you have not yet learned to listen for it deliberately. So how do I learn to listen for it? Slowly, Fenric said with the flat, unimpressed tone of someone who had clearly answered variations of this same impatient question many times before. Again. Guard up. They drilled for hours, not sparring exactly, not the chaotic, adrenaline-fueled exchange of the actual trial, but something more deliberate, more repetitive. Fenric correcting the smallest details of Naruto's stance, his breathing, the angle of his guard, again and again until Naruto's muscles ached with a different kind of fatigue than he was used to. You fight like someone who has spent a great deal of time relying on tricks and clever workarounds, Fenric observed, during a brief pause. Clones. Traps. Unexpected angles born of desperation rather than trained discipline. That's probably fair, Naruto admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. I never really had anybody to teach me proper technique. I just kinda figured stuff out as I went. Something in Fenric's gruff expression softened, fractionally. There is nothing shameful in that. Necessity breeds its own kind of cleverness, and cleverness has clearly served you well enough to survive this far. But a king cannot rely solely on desperation-born tricks forever. Discipline, layered atop instinct, is what separates a warrior who occasionally wins from one who reliably does. All right, Naruto said, rolling his aching shoulders, settling back into his stance. Then teach me the discipline. I'm not scared of hard work. Fenric's mouth twitched into something that was, for the gruff warrior, practically a full smile. Good. Again, Naruto Uzumaki, taking actual training seriously, without a single shortcut in sight? Yeah, I know, new character just dropped, but it doesn't stop with combat. Celine's got her own lessons to teach, and they're a lot less about hitting things and a lot more about seeing them. The next several days settled into a rhythm Naruto hadn't experienced since his earliest, most hopeful days at the academy, before disappointment and dismissal had worn that early enthusiasm down into something more guarded. Mornings with Fenric, drilling combat fundamentals until his muscles screamed. Afternoons with Celine, learning to track, to read terrain, to notice the small details that separated a competent scout from a genuinely great one. Most people look at a forest and see trees, Celine told him, crouched beside a faint set of tracks pressed into soft earth at the valley's edge. Tracks Naruto wouldn't have noticed at all without her pointing them out. A scout looks at a forest and sees a story. This print, see how the weight distributes toward the front paw. That's a moon wolf moving at speed, likely startled by something. Likely within the last hour given how fresh the edges still are. How do you even notice stuff like that? Naruto asked, genuinely fascinated despite the ache still lingering in his legs from the morning's combat drills. Practice, Celine said simply. And patience. The kind of patience that doesn't come naturally to most warriors. If I'm being honest, most people want the fight, the direct confrontation, the immediate resolution. Scouting asks you to sit with uncertainty. To gather information slowly, methodically, before ever committing to action. That sounds like the opposite of basically everything about my personality, Naruto admitted. Celine's golden eyes glinted with amusement. Then it will be good for you to learn it anyway. A king who charges into every situation without first understanding its full shape is a king who will, eventually, charge into a situation he cannot survive. I do not say this to discourage your instincts, Alpha King. Your willingness to act decisively saved lives during the Shadow Beast attack. I say it so that decisiveness is paired, eventually, with proper understanding of what you're actually deciding about. Naruto turned that over as they continued through the valley's outer terrain, Celine pointing out details he'd never have noticed on his own. The subtle difference between natural forest and terrain the Shadow Beast had corrupted, faint traces of old, worn paths predating even the Dominion's current settlement. Small signs of the valley's deep, layered history written into the very ground beneath their feet. Can I ask you something? Naruto said eventually. Do you know anything about the last Alpha King? Tsukikage and Vargas both kinda dodge the question whenever it comes up. Celine's expression shifted, something careful entering her voice. I know fragments. Old stories passed down, more legend than confirmed history by this point. I don't think it's my place to tell you the full account, Alpha King. That belongs to Vargas, if he chooses to share it. He served under the last king personally. The rest of us only know the shape of the loss, not its details. That bad, huh? Bad enough that this valley closed its gates to the wider world for 1,000 years afterward, Celine said quietly. Bad enough that the thrones sat empty rather than risk repeating whatever happened. I would tread carefully with that question, Naruto. Some wounds take considerably longer than 1,000 years to fully close. Naruto thought of his own trial in the sage's circle, of wounds he'd spent years burying under noise and grins, of the strange relief of finally letting himself feel them instead, and nodded slowly, filing the warning away with more weight than he might have given it a week earlier. Yeah, he said. I get that. I'll wait till he's ready to tell me himself. Baylor's training turned out to be the quietest of the three, in a way that suited the massive warrior's steady, unhurried temperament perfectly. Defense, Baylor said on their first afternoon together, is not about standing still and taking every blow. It is about knowing what is worth protecting, and positioning yourself so that protecting it costs you the least. They spend hours working through defensive footwork, through the deliberate art of absorbing an attack's force rather than simply blocking it outright. Baylor's massive frame moving with a grace that seemed almost impossible given his size, demonstrating techniques that had clearly been refined across centuries of careful, patient practice. You throw yourself into danger without hesitation, Baylor observed, during one of their rare breaks. Last night, at the battlefield's edge, when those 3 shadow beasts nearly overwhelmed you, you did not think of your own safety first. You thought of the warriors you were trying to protect. Isn't that the whole point? Naruto said. Protecting people? It is admirable, Baylor said slowly, choosing his words with obvious care. But an alpha king who dies protecting others leaves an entire dominion undefended in his absence. There is a balance to be found, Naruto Uzumaki, between the courage that makes you worth following, and the caution that ensures you remain alive to lead. I do not ask you to abandon the former, I ask only that you learn to weigh it against the latter. It was, Naruto realized slowly, turning the words over as they resumed their training, not so different from something Kakashi had tried to tell him more than once. The difference between reckless bravery and the kind of courage that actually served the people depending on you. Guess some lessons just take a while to actually sink in, he thought, settling back into his defensive stance under Baylor's patient, watchful correction. And Ryuk, sharp-tongued, prickly, hard-won respect Ryuk, turned out to be, somewhat unexpectedly, the one whose company Naruto found himself enjoying the most as the days wore on. You're better at this than you let on, Naruto said during one particularly grueling tactical exercise, Ryuk sketching increasingly complex battlefield scenarios into the dirt, and demanding Naruto talk through his response to each one in real time. Like actually really good. I have spent my entire life training for exactly this kind of responsibility, Ryuk said, though something in his tone had lost most of its old edge. I assumed, until 3 days ago, that I would eventually serve whatever Alpha King the Council selected from among our own bloodlines, assuming the throne was ever filled again at all, which most of us had genuinely stopped expecting. Does it bother you? Naruto asked, genuinely curious. That it ended up being me instead? Ryuk considered the question with more seriousness than Naruto expected. It did at first. I will not pretend otherwise. I resented the idea of an outsider claiming a crown that felt, to me, like it should have belonged to someone born of the Dominion itself. He paused, glancing sideways at Naruto with an expression that had, somewhere over the past several days, shed almost all of its earlier hostility. But watching you these past days, the way you've thrown yourself into training without complaint, the way you led that defense without a shred of hesitation despite having no real preparation for it, the way you actually listen when the rest of us speak instead of simply waiting for your turn to talk, I no longer think the seal made a mistake. I think, perhaps, it saw something the rest of us needed more time to recognize. Naruto felt something warm and unfamiliar tighten in his chest at that. Not quite the same as Sakura's grudging respect, not quite the same as Iruka's steady, fatherly approval, but something adjacent to both, something that felt, for the first time in longer than he could easily remember, like being genuinely seen by someone who'd had every reason not to bother looking closely at all. Thanks, he said quietly. That actually means a lot, coming from you. Do not let it go to your head, Ryuk said, though the warmth in his voice entirely undercut the gruffness of the words. You still have a great deal to learn. Now respond. Shadow Beast Force splits your formation from 2 directions simultaneously. Your reserve is already committed elsewhere. What's your call? Naruto grinned, and dove back into the exercise with renewed focus. Okay, I'll admit it. Watching Ryuk go from I volunteer to humiliate this human to actually, maybe the seal knew what it was doing over the course of like 5 chapters is exactly the kind of character arc I live for. If you're feeling that too, drop a comment because I want to know who else is rooting for this friendship. But not everything happening in this valley is about training and bonding. Something's stirring beyond these mountains, and it's about to make itself known. It happened on the 6th evening since Naruto's coronation, during a rare quiet moment when the elite Alpha Guard had gathered with him near the edge of the settlement, sharing a simple meal of roasted fowl and warm flatbread beneath the valley's ever-present silver moon. Tsukikage arrived without his usual measured calm, golden eyes carrying attention Naruto hadn't seen from the Elder Sentinel since that very first night in the sealing chamber. Alpha King, Tsukikage said, and something in the formal address, rather than Naruto's actual name, immediately set everyone at the table on edge. The sages have sensed a disturbance. Something beyond these mountains has taken notice of the howl that marked your coronation. Naruto set down his food, all traces of the evening's easy warmth evaporating instantly. What kind of disturbance? They are not yet certain, Tsukikage admitted, and the admission itself was unsettling. In 6 days, Naruto had never once heard the ancient elder sentinel express genuine uncertainty about anything. Only that something ancient, something that has watched these mountains from a distance for a very long time, has stirred in response to your coronation howl. The sages believe it may be connected to whatever befell the last Alpha King. A heavy silence fell across the table. Fenric's jaw tightened. Celine's ears flattened, alert and wary. Even steady, unshakable Baylor's massive frame seemed to tense. There's more, Vargas said, arriving in time to catch the tail end of the conversation, his scarred, ancient face carrying an expression that had gone unusually grave. Word has also reached us from beyond the valley's borders, through the old, careful channels we've maintained over the centuries. Your absence has not gone unnoticed, Naruto Uzumaki. Your village searches for you still. And rumors, however distant and unconfirmed, have begun spreading of strange activity in these mountains, a mysterious light, a chorus of impossible howling that carried further than we intended it to. Naruto's stomach dropped. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura. Sasuke. They're probably worried sick. They are not the only ones who have noticed, Vargas said quietly. And I fear, Alpha King, that the two halves of your life, the shinobi world you left behind, and the dominion you have now sworn to protect, are about to collide far sooner than any of us anticipated. Naruto looked around the table, at Fenric's grim readiness, Celine's careful alertness, Baylor's steady, protective calm, Ryuk's hard, focused determination, and felt the full weight of his new crown settle onto his shoulders in a way it hadn't quite managed to during the relatively peaceful days of training that had followed his coronation. 2 worlds, he thought, and I'm standing right in the middle of both of them. Then I guess it's time I figured out how to actually be a bridge between them, he said finally, steadying his voice despite the uncertainty churning beneath it. Before something out there forces the collision on its own terms instead of mine. Tsukikage's golden eyes held his for a long, weighing moment, and then, slowly, the elder sentinel inclined his massive head. Then it is time, he said, for you to meet the ancient beast sages once more, not as a candidate facing trial, but as a king seeking their counsel. There is history you still do not understand, Naruto Uzumaki. History that may prove essential before whatever is stirring beyond these mountains finally reveals itself.